In the past few years, new evidence has come to light that shows that humans have been occupying North America for far longer than we once thought. The discovery of human occupation made in Oregon, dating back to more than 18,250 years ago.
18,000 years ago, someone was in North America when no human was supposed to be there, kneeling in the Oregon desert, cutting into a giant camel with a stone tool. How could that be possible? The ice hadn't melted, the land bridge was closed, and every textbook insists humans hadn't arrived yet. So who was there? And why does the evidence refuse to disappear? The blood left behind in that stone waited nearly 20,000 years to be found, and when it was, it didn't just challenge archaeology, it broke. This is Rimrock Draw, and it's where America's earliest history stopped making sense.
We do some excavation, kind of elementary excavation techniques on units that are near the surface in sandy deposits that still have archaeology but are easier to learn the processes of the trade.
Buried and forgotten. Focus on where this story begins, because the setting itself is part of what made this discovery so shocking. And trust me, once you understand how unremarkable this location appears, the weight of what was found there hits completely different. Imagine driving through central Oregon, hours from any major city, watching the landscape flatten into endless stretches of sagebrush and dry earth. The high desert stretches in every direction, harsh and windswept, painted in shades of brown and gray that blur together under a sky so wide it almost feels oppressive. This is the kind of terrain that makes you wonder how anything survives out here at all. No rivers cutting through the valley. No forests offering shelter. Just miles of emptiness punctuated by low ridges and scattered rock formations that barely interrupt the horizon. Now imagine pulling off onto a dirt road that most people would drive past without noticing. You hike toward one of those low ridges, kicking up dust with every step, and you find a shallow depression carved into the rock face. Nothing impressive, nothing that announces itself. Just a modest overhang, maybe 30 feet wide, offering partial shelter from the relentless summer sun and the bitter winds that tear across this landscape in winter. You could walk right past it and never think twice. Thousands of people probably have. This is Rimrock Draw. And for generations, archaeologists did exactly that. They drove past places like this without a second glance, because everything they believed told them there was nothing worth finding here. You have to understand the thinking that dominated the field for most of the 20th century to appreciate why this location was ignored for so long. Scientists believed they had solved the puzzle of human migration into the Americas. The story was clean, elegant, and accepted as fact. Around 13,000 years ago, a group of hunters crossed from Siberia into Alaska over a land bridge exposed by lower sea levels during the Ice Age. They waited for the massive ice sheets covering Canada to separate, creating a narrow corridor between walls of glacial ice, and then they walked south into a new world that had never known human footsteps. These were the Clovis people, named after the distinctive spear points found near Clovis, New Mexico, back in the 1930s. Their tools became the benchmark against which all other discoveries were measured. Their timeline became gospel, repeated in every textbook and accepted at every university. And any site that didn't fit neatly within that timeline was dismissed, doubted, or explained away as contamination, misidentification, or wishful thinking. The Oregon high desert never stood a chance under this framework. According to every established model, this region was uninhabitable during the Ice Age, too cold, too isolated, too brutal. The glaciers dominated the continent, and places like Rimrock Draw sat far from any proposed migration route. Whatever artifacts might eventually be found here would obviously date to much later periods after the ice retreated and the land softened into something humans could actually survive. That was the assumption. That was the certainty that guided decades of research priorities and funding decisions. Nobody bothered looking for early humans at Rimrock Draw because nobody believed early humans could possibly have been there.
Well, they're digging for any evidence of human occupation, and it can mean just simply obsidian flakes or rocks that have been placed in a certain pattern, or it could be what we call artifacts, which would be like portions of a spear point.
The models said no. The theories said no. The entire weight of scientific consensus said absolutely not. And every single one of those assumptions was about to be proven catastrophically wrong. Because beneath that unremarkable rock shelter, sealed under layers of volcanic ash and undisturbed sediment, evidence had been waiting for thousands of years. Evidence that would shatter the timeline completely. Sediment of secrets. This is the moment the story takes its first unexpected turn. The researchers who changed everything weren't even searching for evidence of ancient humans. A team from the University of Oregon arrived at Rimrock Draw with a straightforward, uncontroversial goal. They wanted to study Ice Age animals and track environmental changes over time. This was safe science, the kind that doesn't make headlines or spark debates at conferences. They expected to find shallow deposits from the end. Of the glacial period, maybe some scattered animal bones, perhaps evidence of how the ecosystem transformed as temperatures warmed. Nothing revolutionary, nothing that would challenge established models. Patrick O'Grady, the district archaeologist who had worked in the Burns district for over 2 decades, was familiar with the area. The Bureau of Land Management had documented the site, but nobody expected it to yield anything significant. It was just another rock shelter in a region full of them. Then the excavation began, and the first anomaly appeared almost immediately. The sediment layers at Rimrock Draw were wrong. Not wrong in a way that suggested contamination or disturbance. Wrong in a way that suggested something remarkable had been preserved. In most rock shelters, soil becomes chaotic over thousands of years. Roots push downward, disrupting older deposits. Animals burrow through, mixing materials from different time periods. Water washes sediment from upper layers into lower ones, creating confusion that makes accurate dating nearly impossible. Archaeologists expect this. They account for it. They work around it. But at Rimrock Draw, the layers sat flat and separate, stacked in perfect order like pages of a book that nobody had touched. Dark bands marked periods of activity. Lighter bands showed gaps when the shelter went unused. The separation was so clean, so undisturbed, that researchers could trust whatever they found to tell an accurate chronological story. This kind of preservation is exceptionally rare, and it meant that the team was about to encounter evidence they couldn't explain away. Millennia of footsteps. As the excavation pushed deeper, stone tools began appearing in the sediment. This wasn't entirely surprising. Rock shelters across the region contain evidence of human activity from various periods. What made these finds troubling was where they appeared in the ground. The tools weren't clustered in a single layer the way you'd expect if people had visited once and moved on. They appeared at multiple depths, separated by long stretches of time recorded in the sediment between them. This pattern told a story that challenged everything the team thought they understood. Someone had found this location thousands of years ago and decided it was worth returning to. Then another group came back, generations later, and made the same decision. And then another, and another. Over and over across millennia, humans sought out this specific shelter in the Oregon high desert as if it were marked on some ancient map passed down through countless generations. Rimrock Draw wasn't an accident of survival, a random spot where starving wanderers happened to find refuge. It was a destination, a place that early Americans remembered and deliberately returned to across unimaginable spans of time. But here's where the discovery started to become uncomfortable for the established timeline. Every additional inch of depth pushed the dates further back. Every new tool recovered from lower sediment layers made the contradiction with accepted history more severe. The team kept digging, kept documenting, and kept finding evidence that simply wasn't supposed to be there. The tools themselves showed remarkable consistency. These weren't random rocks cracked by natural forces. They were carefully shaped implements with deliberate edges designed for cutting and scraping. The craftsmanship remained uniform across multiple layers, suggesting a continuous tradition of tool-making that persisted for thousands of years. Whoever these people were, they knew exactly what they were doing. And then the team hit the layer that changed everything. Butchering history. Buried beneath a thick band of volcanic ash, the excavation uncovered something that would ultimately demolish the Clovis first model entirely. They found teeth and jaw fragments belonging to Camelops histernus, the giant camel that once roamed North America. Picture: an animal standing nearly 7 feet tall at the shoulder, a massive creature that disappeared from this continent thousands of years before humans were believed to have reached Oregon. Finding its remains at Rimrock Draw was surprising enough. The location of those remains in the sediment sequence made the discovery devastating. The camel bones weren't scattered randomly, the way you'd expect if the animal had simply died nearby or been dragged into the shelter by predators. Natural processes don't organize bones. Scavengers tear carcasses apart and spread pieces across the landscape. Decay and weathering create chaos. But these remains were clustered tightly in a specific area, arranged in a pattern that only appears when an animal has been deliberately processed for meat and resources. Close examination revealed cut marks on the bones, not shallow scratches, not ambiguous surface damage that could be attributed to natural causes. These were straight, repeated lines concentrated at the joints where meat is normally separated from the skeleton. This is exactly the signature that stone tools leave behind during butchering. The marks matched human activity precisely, and no alternative explanation could account for their presence. Now here's the detail that sealed the case and made this discovery impossible to dismiss. The volcanic ash layer covering these remains came from a known eruption of Mount St. Helens that occurred more than 15,600 years ago. Volcanic ash spreads rapidly and settles evenly across entire regions, creating an unmistakable timestamp that geologists can identify with precision. Once that ash falls, anything buried beneath it cannot be younger than the eruption itself. The physics are absolute. The timeline is locked. At Rimrock Draw, the ash layer was completely intact, undisturbed, sealed. Nothing from above had penetrated into the deposits below. The camel remains and the evidence of human butchering were trapped beneath a geological clock that could not be argued with. But the team wanted absolute certainty. They sent samples for radiocarbon dating, targeting the camel tooth enamel directly. This bypassed any questions about association or context. The tooth itself would reveal when the animal died. The result came back at approximately 18,250 years before present. Let that sink in. 18,000 years ago, someone at Rimrock Draw was butchering a giant camel with stone tools. This wasn't a borderline estimate or a questionable reading that could be explained away. The date placed human activity in Oregon more than 5,000 years before the Clovis people were supposed to have arrived anywhere in North America. The textbooks were wrong. The bottom of the shelter. After the radiocarbon dates demolished the timeline, the research team needed one final confirmation that humans had actively worked at this location. That proof came from the stone tools, found in direct association with the butchered remains. These implements weren't crude rocks picked up in desperation by people barely surviving. They were carefully crafted scrapers with sharp working edges designed for specific tasks. But the most revealing detail wasn't the craftsmanship. It was the material. The scrapers were made from orange agate, a distinctive stone that doesn't occur naturally anywhere near Rimrock Draw. The local rock types are completely different in color, texture, and fracture pattern. Someone had to transport this material from a distant source, either by traveling significant distances to collect it themselves or by obtaining it through trade networks with other groups. Think about what that implies. The These weren't random survivors stumbling through an unfamiliar landscape, grabbing whatever rocks they could find. These were people with geographic knowledge, social connections, and the organizational capacity to acquire specific materials for their tools. Either they maintained relationships with distant communities, or they possessed detailed mental maps of resource locations across vast territories. This level of sophistication wasn't supposed to exist during the Ice Age. The old models depicted early Americans as simple bands following animal herds, living hand to mouth, lacking the complex social structures that produced trade networks and specialized knowledge. The orange agate scrapers told a different story entirely. Under magnification, the tool edges revealed wear patterns that only developed through repeated use on animal tissue. Tiny fractures followed predictable paths caused by pressure against meat, hide, and bone. These patterns match exactly what experimental archaeologists observe when modern replicas are used to butcher large animals. The Rimrock Draw tools weren't made and immediately discarded. Someone used them extensively over time. And then came another bombshell. One scraper was recovered from a sediment layer, deeper than the camel remains themselves. In undisturbed deposits, deeper always means older. The remarkable preservation at Rimrock Draw confirmed this tool was deposited before the camel butchering event. Humans were present at this location even earlier than 18,250 years ago. The bottom of the shelter hadn't even been reached yet. 20,000 years of proof. The final evidence came from something invisible to the naked eye but impossible to dismiss once detected. And this is where the story shifts from compelling to absolutely undeniable. Residue analysis examines microscopic traces left behind when tools are used on living material. Here's how it works. When a stone edge cuts through flesh or scrapes across a hide, fluids and proteins are forced into tiny cracks and fractures on the tool surface. These aren't visible scratches or obvious stains. They're molecular traces, pushed deep into the microscopic geography of the stone itself. Over time, these traces dry and become permanently trapped, preserved in miniature crevices where air and bacteria cannot reach them. Under the right conditions, biological evidence can survive this way for thousands of years, waiting silently for someone to finally look. Scientists selected stone scrapers from Rimrock Draw that had already been identified as working tools based on their shape and distinctive wear patterns. These weren't random rocks. They were implements that clearly showed evidence of repeated use. After careful cleaning to remove any modern contamination that might corrupt the results, the tools were tested under controlled laboratory conditions using protein residue analysis. What they found changed everything. The results identified blood proteins matching Bison antiquus, a massive Ice Age species that vanished from this continent thousands of years ago. This wasn't modern bison. This wasn't a closely related animal that might create ambiguity. The protein signature was specific, distinctive, and unmistakable. That stone tool had been used to process an ancient bison carcass directly, and the biological proof had survived inside the rock for nearly 20,000 years. This evidence locked the entire discovery together in a way that left zero room for alternative explanations. The stone tools, the butchered animals, and the humans who wielded those tools were now connected biologically, not just by physical proximity in the sediment layers. These weren't objects that happened to lie near animal remains through some geological coincidence. They were the instruments that acted upon those animals. The murder weapons, if you want to think of it that way. Someone stood at Rimrock Draw nearly 20,000 years ago. They held these exact stones in their hands. They used them with purpose and skill on creatures that no living human has ever seen. And the blood they spilled soaked into those tools and stayed there, waiting across 200 centuries to testify. Ice Age mariners. For most of the 20th century, the Clovis first theory defined the boundaries of American prehistory. It provided a clean, simple narrative that fit neatly into textbooks. Humans arrived around 13,000 years ago, walked south through an ice-free corridor, and spread across 2 continents from there. Rimrock Draw makes this model physically impossible. At 18,000 years ago, North America was locked in the last glacial maximum. The Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets hadn't yet separated. The corridor that Clovis' first theory requires for human migration didn't exist. It was blocked by miles of ice. And yet humans were already living in Oregon. The only explanation that fits both the dates and the physical landscape is coastal migration. Even during peak glacial conditions, the Pacific coastline remained partially accessible. Kelp forests along the shore created a continuous food-rich environment that could have supported human movement southward from Alaska. This route would have required watercraft and navigation skills that scientists once refused to attribute to early Americans. The evidence at Rimrock Draw supports exactly this level of sophistication. People capable of planning, trading for specific tool materials, and deliberately returning to favorable locations across millennia were certainly capable of building boats and following coastlines. The old assumption that Ice Age humans were too primitive for maritime travel now looks like the prejudice it always was. What lies beneath? Here's the detail that should keep every archaeologist awake at night. The detail that transforms this discovery from groundbreaking to genuinely unsettling. Because as remarkable as everything I've described so far might be, the truth is that we've only scratched the surface. Literally. The camel tooth that dated to 18,250 years ago wasn't recovered from the bottom of the Rimrock Draw deposits. Not even close. Beneath it lie deeper sediment layers, darker bands of earth that have barely been touched, containing stone fragments and subtle indicators of human activity that haven't been fully analyzed yet. The evidence that rewrote the textbooks came from somewhere in the middle of this site's story. The beginning remains buried. In undisturbed sediment, the rules of stratigraphy are absolute. Deeper always means older. Material settles over time, layer upon layer, century upon century, and whatever lies beneath was deposited before whatever lies above. There's no ambiguity here, no interpretation required. It's simple physics applied across geological time. And the remarkable preservation at Rimrock Draw means those lower layers can be trusted completely. The pages of this book haven't been shuffled. They remain in order, waiting to be read. Some stone flakes recovered from these deeper levels already show patterns consistent with the tools found higher up. The same deliberate shaping. The same evidence of human craftsmanship. Their presence whispers a possibility that nobody is quite ready to confirm yet. Human occupation at this site didn't begin 18,000 years ago. It began earlier. How much earlier? That's the question that haunts the researchers who've worked here. And here's what makes this even more frustrating. Excavation hasn't reached the bottom of the shelter. Limited funding and legitimate preservation concerns have prevented archaeologists from fully exposing the site. You can't just tear through deposits this valuable. Every centimeter must be documented, photographed, carefully removed, and analyzed. The work is painstaking by necessity. Rushing would destroy the very evidence everyone is trying to recover. So the complete story remains only partially revealed. Each untouched layer might contain tools, animal remains, or other evidence that pushes the timeline back further than current estimates suggest. 20,000 years? 25,000? Could humans have been returning to this same shelter for 30,000 years or more? Nobody knows. The answer is right there, sealed beneath volcanic ash and accumulated sediment. But reaching it requires time and resources that haven't materialized yet. Think about what that means. Somewhere beneath that modest rock shelter in the Oregon high desert, evidence exists that could rewrite human history even more dramatically than what's already been found. It's not theoretical. It's not speculative. The deeper layers are there, documented and photographed, containing artifacts that follow the same patterns as everything above them. The proof is waiting. It simply hasn't been excavated yet. The ground at Rimrock Draw has been keeping secrets for a very long time. Some of those secrets have finally been revealed. Others remain buried, patient and silent, holding answers to questions we haven't even learned to ask yet. The sophisticated survivors, the people who left evidence at Rimrock Draw, were not desperate wanderers barely clinging to survival in an unfamiliar landscape. They selected specific locations with precision. They understood complex environmental factors and seasonal patterns. They created tools demonstrating material knowledge, planning ability, and sophisticated techniques refined over generations. They hunted and processed massive Ice Age animals during some of the harshest conditions this continent has ever experienced.
Ideas keep changing about how early people crossed over into America, but currently evidence points to a land bridge that once existed between the continents of Asia and America.
They did all of this at least 5,000 years before the experts said humans arrived anywhere in North America. This level of capability wasn't supposed to exist for this period. The discovery forces a complete rethinking of what early humans were able to achieve in Ice Age America. These weren't primitive bands struggling to exist. They were organized communities with established territories, trading relationships, detailed knowledge of their environment, and the skills to thrive where later scientists assumed survival was impossible. The patronizing assumption that ancient people were somehow less intelligent, less capable, less sophisticated than modern humans has been exposed as the arrogant mistake it always was. Rimrock Draw didn't just change a date on a timeline, it exposed how fragile our certainty really is. If humans were here thousands of years earlier than we believed, moving with skill, intent, and knowledge we never accounted for, then this site isn't an exception. It's a warning. A warning that entire chapters of human history may still be buried, dismissed, or waiting in places no one thought to look. The deeper we dig, the less secure the old story becomes. And if one forgotten rock shelter could upend everything we thought we knew, how many more are still out there, silently rewriting our past, while we walk above them unaware?